Good afternoon and good morning. Hello, friends. This is Jim Martin, and I'm with my longtime writing and consulting partner, Jim Samels, and we're going to talk today about the hard truths in academic leadership. Thank you for joining us this afternoon on the 8th of October. A few things as opening points. Think of this as the acknowledgments page in a book, and the Provosts Handbook from Johns Hopkins did somewhat lead us here. Thanks very much to the HigherEdJobs team of Grant and Amanda and Andy and Kelly for what we see as an important new step into news, resources, and content, much more the player that they deserve to be. We appreciate working with them. Thanks also to the Mount Ida Advancement Office for giving us the setup. But most importantly, we're here because of a Johns Hopkins editor named Greg Britton who had the vision to say, why don't we make the cover of the Provosts Handbook white? Everybody likes white. And what that amounted to was, we knew that what he was saying, and that is that the Provosts Handbook covers many of the challenges, as the introduction and the advertisements for this have said today, are not in the guidebook. The truths are sometimes dark or hidden for leading academic officers, not always provosts, not always academic vice presidents or vice presidents for instruction. Sometimes it's a dean. Sometimes it's, in fact, another administrator who carries a heavy burden and doesn't always have the answers. In the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to go through 5 slides. We are going to give you some of the hard truths about academic leadership. And the first one, each slide has 3 points on it. We're going to talk back and forth. We hope we'll have some fun. But where we're headed is some answers that often in our past 30 years of consulting and provosting and higher education attorneying, we've been asked questions for. The first one is how slow higher education seems to be moving as students are moving faster and faster. Jim, would you like to kick that off?
Exit polling. Do you ask students who leave you, where did they go and why did they go there? We're really good at the front end of the enrollment funnel of finding out where our students come from and why. But we could do a real better job at figuring out if they come to us and don't enroll, or if they come to us and enroll and go someplace else, why did they do that? And what are our competitors doing? That means being an environmental scanner on a continuous basis. It's all about market. And if you have no reference to what other people are doing, then you won't have a benchmark. You need to be ahead of the students in terms of hot jobs and where gainful employment is going, particularly in light of the new regulatory environment, which triangulates gainful employment and academic success, and student debt load. So environmental scanning, exit polling, and figuring out what the hot jobs are going to be when they graduate several years from now.
And also governance. Do you have, we're not going to talk just about small institutions. Yes, we will this afternoon talk some about fragile. We'll talk about mergers and closures, which is where our research is taking us now, but also larger institutions. How long does it take you to start a new degree program? Not simply a degree program that is workforce driven, but a degree program that the faculty, most importantly, believe is right for your mission and your market. If it takes longer than a year, you're cooked because the students will seek another institution. Let's talk some about administrative bloat. Many articles over the past 5 to 10 years that can detail the number of administrators who have taken positions and are in the positions and are hanging on to the positions over the past 25 years as the number of faculty have been retiring. Many institutions hire those people for important tasks, and then maybe that task isn't quite as important, but the person is still there. Jim, talk about the growth of administration and the decline of the faculty in that context.
You know, this is one of those, Gyms, that you and I can have honest differences. As I travel around to a lot of small college campuses, I don't frankly see a lot of administrative bloat. I do see media hype of what this president got, or the payout, or some annuity, some hyperbole about executive comp. But I do think it's important to benchmark and take your table of organization and lay it against other comparable institutions to know how you're spending your administrative money. Because yes, I'll agree with this, we've become under the microscope, particularly in terms of federal regulatory, and executive compensation stories have, I think, miscast academic management resources.
Good point, good point. Let's talk some now about budget complexities. The slide that you have in front of you is a little wordy in coming to the basic point that teachers and scholars and chief academic officers, but again, we're not simply talking about provosts today. We're talking about deans and assistant deans, and particularly newly appointed academic officers who we will talk a bit about really haven't had a chance to gather any training much at all, who were faithfully trained as scholars in a discipline and were good at working with people. May or may not have suffered fools gladly, but now they're in a position of authority and they need some answers. Well, the way budget works often is that what we've observed is the budget manager will retain authority and the chief academic officer will make points, or a dean will make points, but they may or may not be listened to. And so what happens is that the academic officer will learn to budget carefully, which is very different than budgeting skillfully. What are we saying? We're saying that there needs to be a weekly meeting between the chief finance officer and the academic leadership. A weekly meeting that is hard stopped in time so everybody knows they can breathe free after 30 minutes, but they need to talk about the budget priorities, and academic officers need to sometimes step forward more assertively. Do you agree with that, my friend, Dr. Samels?
Yeah, essentially I do, Jim, but I think measuring academic productivity, whether it's instructional productivity or research and publication productivity, scholarship productivity, is very important when you make your case to your CFO from the academic dean's point of view. I think also you got to spend a buck to make a buck. And you should not be proposing new programs unless you've received two things. Number one, a proof of concept for exactly, okay, so what is this going to achieve and what kind of jobs it's going to lead to, or what kind of graduate programs is it going to lead the student to, and a long-term business model, some kind of a, because it's not how much you borrow, it's about how you pay back. And if it's properly planned with the right proof of concept and the right business model, then it's a net revenue project and not a net expenditure.
Number 4, depending on your campus, depending on your heritage and mission and the paths that the leaders of your campus have taken to where they are, sometimes consensus will rule when in fact, back to the earlier points that Jim made about proof of concept and the timely introduction of new programs to stay competitive, sometimes an assertive decision is what's important. But we all, in fact, have sometimes been challenged by the tyranny of the consensus decision that takes so long to achieve, and then really, when people sit and stare at each other, wonder, what is it we just decided? Because sometimes it doesn't feel like a decision. Sometimes people go out of the room feeling, at least we didn't do this. But sometimes then the chief academic officer or the academic officer is conflicted about, should I have said, should I have leaned, should I have done? Talk about the authority of academic officers.
I think it's acquired. You've got to earn that respect. It's more than just leaving the door open to faculty. Sometimes you have to take your toughest faculty critics and take them to lunch and actively listen. Now, it's not about a popularity contest. That's why you're the first among equals. That's why you're the chief academic officer. That said, you really want to nurture the relationships on an individual basis. Don't allow people to represent your position at some faculty senate meeting without at least knowing your own faculty and letting them get to know you.
And the longer you're in the position, and again, whatever level of academic leadership, you know those people who are rowing with you and those people who aren't, and that's the nature of the academy. But be careful. Don't expect a consensus to be achieved and cover over a lack of harmony. A consensus, in fact, is not an umbrella in that regard. And key point, assertive decision-making can sometimes stimulate a productive consensus. Back to you, Jim.
If you're really doing your job, half of the faculty think you're going too fast, and the other half are saying, what took them so long? Well, you know what? Sometimes the truth is halfway in between. What you don't want to do is delay personnel decisions so long that they're irreversible. You need to take stock. You need to take a look in the mirror. And then you need to make some decisions on a timely basis.
That's a point that we should emphasize again, because in the writing of the Provosts Handbook, we interviewed many chief academic officers, many presidents who had been chief academic officers, and when we asked them routinely, what's a lesson learned? What would you have done differently now knowing? And many of these people are now in retirement who spoke very candidly with us. One of the key points was, I should have made a tough decision earlier. I should have, in fact, recognizing what I recognized, I should have, in fact, changed the position. Yes, I should have separated somebody from the institution who was, in fact, not on board with where we needed to go. Person didn't, and back again. Remember, consensus isn't an umbrella. It's not going to protect you. Richard Ekman. Richard Ekman, a good friend and longtime colleague, is the president of the Council of Independent Colleges. It is a multi-hundred institution membership, and Richard gets it. He, in fact, wrote a chapter in the Provosts Handbook, and in November, we're speaking to you on October 8th. In the first week of November, Richard and we will be in Baltimore for the CIC CAO. It's an annual gathering. In fact, they claim it's the largest gathering of chief academic officers in the country on an annual basis. And this year they have rotated in to meet with chief advancement officers. Back to the thanks for Jill Abrams at Mount Ida for setting us up here today. In November, come to Baltimore and see Richard and talk to him about the next point. Lack of formal training. Training? Says the chief academic officer or the new dean. I didn't get any training. I got an appointment. In fact, I don't even have tenure. I'm really on my wits here. Richard is more than lobbying. He is trying to develop in the CIC network a training program for willing academic leaders, not just chief academic officers. We've seen the benefits of that. There's a chapter in the book, so we won't belabor it, but Jim, could you add the lack of training and what it can do to an institution when the new dean comes aboard?
Well, you know, rookies can do a lot of damage when they don't know what they don't know and when they're in denial. Number one, don't be afraid to get outside of the campus, and that means go to conferences. It's amazing what you can learn from your peers outside the traditional campus. Two, don't rely on email. If you really want to get the full experience, you need to put it on a personalized basis. Don't assume that everybody's going to come to you. You need to reach out. And mostly, think about attending the kind of academic boot camps that will prepare you to be a more effective thought leader when you return to campus. Jim?
Yeah, I was just thinking too about the United States Distance Learning Association, the US DLA, led by John Flores. Very good in terms of an association that is sensitive to academic leadership. Yes, its mission and portfolio is through technology, but keep your eye on US DLA along with CIC.
And
their conference is in St. Louis in April.
And then there's UB Tech, and I know many folks follow university business, and UB Tech registration will begin sometime late in the fall for, is it a June, Jim?
It's usually the first week of June, and I think this year it may be that they're going back to Las Vegas, which draws a lot of people too. UB Tech is the very interesting conference that is spun off of University Business Magazine. Again, as with United States Distance Learning Association, these are not simply tech conferences. These are conferences born of tech, looking at the future, and we try to do that all the time, and we're trying to do that this afternoon. Number 6, salary. Talk about a sensitive area. What we're seeing, and really I think I'm neutral on this point, but what we're seeing in the last, say, 4, 5, 6, 7 years is newly appointed academic officers, whether dean, AVP, or provost, who will in fact come in without tenure and without a faculty slot. Usually the person says, I didn't want that. Well, what we would say today is that represents a change, and that similar to the earlier point, the lack of formal training, there should be an orchestrated conversation about salaries, because we can surely tell you that a good number of academic leaders would like to talk about salary structures for their work and long hours. Any salary points, Jim?
Yeah, benchmark. You know, we benchmark for everything else. We benchmark for our faculty's workload. We benchmark in terms of full-time, part-time. We benchmark for everybody else's compensation. You need to benchmark for your own. You need to look at the size of your operating budgets, the scale of the student body, the number and diversity of academic programs, and you need to think about fair comparisons. Nobody's going to make the case for you. You've got to make your own case to be paid what you're entitled to.
I wonder if any listener today is going to counter and say, no, the ranks of full-time tenured professors are growing, Martin and Samels. Don't be the Dexters of higher education. What we're seeing is, in fact, that's not true. That there is a decline in the number of full-time tenured professors. And back to the issue of training for chief academic officers or candid discussions about salary, we're seeing what it is, and we're seeing the changing nature of our profession. And what does it mean that you find tenure in decline? That's not shaking news. We didn't first say that. We read it 112 times. Tenure is in decline. It's not offered as often. There's a changing nature for it. Possibly it'll be replaced by rolling contracts and so on, but many places have had those for years too.
I think the definition of tenure has changed from the quaint notion of a lifelong sinecure to a system of peer evaluation of performance and how that applies. Indeed, multiple year contracts has become the norm. That is eligibility for multiple year contracts. And tenure is no longer either perceived or indeed really insulation from program retrenchment.
Excellent point. And back to the point about whether you want to call it bloat or not, there is a growth that you can document in the number of administrators on campuses. And as the number of faculty tenure decline, I think one of the points we're making is that there is also a decline in the engagement of the faculty on the campus because there are not as many of them. There are more decisions being made by administrators that have everything from governance to rock salt in that way. And some would say, that's for sure. That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. But we're saying that the collegium is changing, and that leads to number 8. We had thought about making 8 not just the pressure for an adjunct solution, but the ease of the adjunct solution. Because is it not true? I think we would guess that a good number of listeners today see that their campus is being transformed because not the driver being a declining number of tenured full-time professors, but the driver being the need for programs that are workforce sensitive and local and regional economic driven, and the need for specialists, practitioners, former governors, former CEOs, and so on, and all that implies with the changes in the collegium. But adjuncts are an easy way to go forward. They're less expensive, and one can then tout the new program because it's being taught by someone who in fact just was a policymaker in. How about adjuncts? What have you seen, Jim? What's a new or lasting effect of that?
Educate them. If indeed they haven't been in a classroom in a long time or not at all, but they're a very successful business person, make sure that they're transformed into a scholar practitioner. Not everybody is acquainted with the nuances of pedagogy, so you can't have it both ways. If you're going to pluck them from industry, make sure they're classroom ready and not just job ready.
We would lobby for a much more extensive orientation for your adjunct faculty. Adjunct faculty have many legitimate reasons why it is difficult for them to be on campus when they are not teaching. We understand that, but we would put it on the agenda of the academic officers at all levels to find ways, virtually, online, technologically as well as in person, to educate and orient their adjunct faculty. No, they are not going to replace a long-time serving tenured full professor, but they certainly will gain from learning about the mission of the institution, recent changes and breaking news, and how they are in fact going to play a part in that institution's next chapter. Make it a positive rather than a negative. The pace of technological change is, again, not something that we're going to dig deep into. It's more the second part of number 9, its impact on budget design. What we're seeing then is that the chief academic officer or the academic leadership team charged with budget design simply cannot be always, collectively or individually, ahead of the technological trends, and that there's sometimes a disconnect and a tremendous what? In terms of the costs of the changing technologies. And back to, again, where did many of these leaders on the academic side come from? They came from scholarly disciplines. They were trained in the classroom, where in fact instructional technology may be cutting edge. But that's different than institutional operations and knowing how to in fact use money, back to the differences between budgeting carefully and timidly and budgeting skillfully. Sometimes there is a major disconnect between the costs of technology and how to spend and budget for it. Talk some about budgets, Jim.
Just say no. Too many fatal mistakes have been made in just buying into, okay, we'll just go for that whole system without any competitive pricing, without any competitive presentations. So it's okay to say no, or at least I want you to bring me back several proposals. One of them will approve this 3 new full-time people. Another one, though, should be an outsourcing, where we can get this done outside, and maybe even a co-sourcing, where our partners work inside side by side with us. Outsourcing, co-sourcing, they're not mutually exclusive with building technology capacity. Be prepared to just say no and have them come back creatively and develop other models.
Jim, could you talk some now about how many times we've been in whether it's a focus group or visiting a campus, a board sometimes, or a faculty doing a retreat, and you'll tell the story about how many have the computer and the cell phone.
Yeah. Well, typically you get into a classroom situation, even if it's a large class, 100 kids, and you ask them how many have computers, and half of them may have computers, laptops of some type, but if you ask them how many have cell phones, you're liable to get an answer of 99. And out of those 99, how many are smartphones? A lot. And if you talk to young people today, they get their information way differently than we do. They're far more interested in what's going on Facebook than they are on picking up voicemail or email. So if you really want to get into the stream, you need to have mobile apps in order to deliver coursework and learning experiences. By the way, these people want real time too. They want high touch, high tech. They want to see other students, and they just don't want to sit with a laptop. They really don't. They are moving, and they could be on trains, they could be on buses, they could be on field trips. Yep, and they want to take it with them.
You see the convergence, as we do, between the iPad, the iPad mini, the iPhone 5, the iPhone 6, and the iPhone 6 Plus. What we're seeing is then those things, one growing smaller, one growing larger. There's going to be a very big bingo in the next few years, and that's one of the things we're talking about, which is degree programs on a device that's bigger than a phone and smaller than an iPad, and it is absolutely smaller than a laptop. It's mobile. And back to the earlier point, if for a person trained in biology, good. We need to have someone oriented to social media. There are some wonderful consultants out there who are on the edge in social media and higher education, which leads to number 11, customizing degrees. This, again, something we didn't first hear, but we've seen some tremendously sophisticated work being done by United States Distance Learning Association in customizing degrees, which goes beyond cell phones. It's a way to think about. That. First time often it'll come onto a campus is, well, wait a minute, have you seen how much that's going to cost? Jim, can you talk some about how that isn't the point? Customizing degrees
Right.
is coming like a steamroller.
Well, we've learned a lot about cognitive development, and we're now applying that to niche different learning styles. That's right. People learn differently. Being able to have adaptive technologies that can customize to the cognitive development of that student, to the knowledge transfer capacity of that student, I think is key. By the way, Jim, my son informed me that he was tossing his iPhone because the hot little thing that's bigger than a cell phone and smaller than a computer is now on the street, and it is prolific. It's called phablets, and if you haven't seen them, oh yeah, they can wear them, and it gives the benefit of both worlds.
Definitely so. So think convergence. Bingo, bingo. Now, the mostly broken business model. Kudos to Inside Higher Ed and its leadership for a survey that, and now I'm reading, according to 56% of college university presidents agree or strongly agree they are confident in the sustainability of their institution's financial model. Now, wait for it now. For the next 5 years. That, in fact, goes down only 39%. We see that as about a third, listeners, are responding, agreed that they were confident in the sustainability of their institutions over the next 10 years. We could spend all day on this issue, on the mostly, in general, there's two parentheses there, the mostly broken business model. Jim, can you dive in and talk about how the presidents we're working with are going to handle the next 10 years?
Trough planning, that's what it's all about. That is developing a set of dashboard indicators about tuition dependence, about tuition discounting, about ratios between endowment and operating funds and deferred maintenance and debt service and average student debt burden, and then adjusting those by 1 point. Just think about it. Adjust your conversion yield just 1 point a year over the 5 or 10 year period. That has a significant revenue implication of taking you from in the black and net revenue to a structural deficit. So the key to the future of sustainability is to trough plan. Worst scenario, best scenario, likely scenario. It allows you to position and then recalibrate, reset in the market.
Let's also, which is partly why we put the parentheses there, mostly broken, let's think about it differently. And let's ask those presidents, and certainly maybe today, even more pointedly, the academic leaders to think about it differently rather than calling it a broken business model. We would draw your attention to, on the 18th in the Chronicle, just 2 weeks ago, Richard DeMillo's piece, Gatekeepers No More, Colleges Must Learn a New Role, for this sentence. Innovators plan to transplant the business of higher education to the internet, with all the gains in productivity that the move might entail. Improved classroom productivity means, among other things, that the structure of academic institutions will change. So rather than get caught up in the decline of the full-time tenured professor, the hiring of adjuncts who don't have time to attend meetings, or students who complain that they want programs on their cell phones. Let's think about differently the way we do business as it moves over to the internet, and not call it a broken business model, just that it's time to take a new look at the way business is done. For our final three slides then, one about environmental sustainability. Prior to the Provosts Handbook, we did a book called The Sustainable University at the invitation of Johns Hopkins, and one of the things we learned is that maybe like some of those people in Europe and car emissions, there's a real resistance on campuses that environmental sustainability is a truth. Environmental sustainability requires a new way to think about an institution, and we saved this one for near the end because that has impacts on the way faculty are oriented, budgets are designed, students are taught, and missions are implemented. Jim, talk some about the Sustainable University.
The Sustainable University recognizes that it's all about buildings. You're not going to solve the pollution problem from just emissions on automobiles. It's buildings. And those buildings have ecosystems of their own, and they have energy systems. The key piece is energy efficient solutions, whether it's the light bulbs, whether it's the timeliness security, or more frequently, the choice of renewable energy. The renewable energy role in terms of buildings and in terms of pollution is the single biggest change that you can make on campus. That's the biggest bang for the buck. Renewable energy in college buildings.
And be careful about LEED. Be careful about what it means, and not simply let it become a name to break your bank. Take a look at what the best level of LEED is. And some people, we learned when we were writing that book, The Sustainable University, that they said LEED is not the answer. It's more of a mission to look forward to. 2 to go. Uneven student engagement. And what we mean by that is, in fact, if we're correct, I think that the following webinar from HigherEdJobs is going to be on the darkening of the student profession, student affairs and student affairs administrators with Sheila Murphy. Keep your eye out for that one, because what we're seeing from the academic side is a lack of student involvement and engagement in strategic planning. A tremendous resource being overlooked, sometimes intentionally, sometimes inadvertently. They are a resource on campuses. Yes, we are seeing some institutions as involving them, and one we found, President Lehigh, John Simon, who was at UVA before that and Duke before that, had a real good handle on involving students in the strategic planning process. What about engaging students on campus, not just for strategic planning, Jim?
Well, not just on campus, but off campus as well. And what that means is required externships, required field practicums that are evaluated from the home campus, but a key to applying the world of learning and earning is actually getting out there, Jim, in the field, hands-on experiences. So I can't emphasize enough that from a student engagement perspective, internships play a critical role. Tremendous. Both in campus and on campus.
We like to usually end with comments about students so that we can always say, let's not forget that they're first and foremost what we're doing on these campuses. Today, though, we end with a different one as we wrap things up. Maybe looking ahead to visiting with you again in the coming months or in 2016. And that is the pressure to invent the wheel, the insulation. Jim, I'm busy. I barely get enough time to listen to you talking today. The insulation of academic administrators. Once they get the job, their desk becomes piled. It's not even the desk anymore. Their phone becomes clogged with all the things they need to do. As we go forward from the Provosts Handbook, working with Greg Britton at Johns Hopkins, we're working on a new book called The Consolidation of American Higher Education. New reasons to partner, merge, or close. We're going to be talking about college closures and mergers, as so many are, the why and what to do about it. How do you handle that? And that will get us in the next year or two of our research into smaller institutions. Where we end today is with, as in the broken business model, let's call it something different. Let's end today with looking at new ways to turn competitors into collaborators. Jim, how about a closing thought on that?
Shared solutions. Don't think you have to go it alone. There are solutions to the toughest questions. So, if you've got questions, please send them along and we'll answer them. You can get us at edall@edalliance.com. We are the Education Alliance.
Or at jmartin.ida.edu. And
if you need immediate contact, just send them to Samels Law. That's SAMELSLAW, one word, Samels Law @yahoo.com. And we'll get back to you over time. Jim?
Yep. And so partners, new kinds of partnerships, and turning competitors. We mean that both professionally on the campus, looking at departments that in fact may have been competing for budget. Stop thinking that way. Start finding ways to leverage the strengths. But where we're headed today is off the edge of your campus to turning competitor institutions into co-venturing, strategic alliance partners, so that, yes, as we go forward and you listen to the Moody's, the trepidation of the Moody's predictions, please know that what our research is showing us in closing is that the number of institutions may change, but the good missions of and the hard work done by those small institutions will live on as they are transformed, not closed, but transformed into new, larger entities as they join other institutions. With that said, we hope to join you again in 2016. Keep an eye out for the Consolidation of American Higher Education. new reasons to partner, merge, or close. This is Jim Martin and Jim Samels. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks, folks, and thanks, Jim Martin from Jim Samels.